Well, hey, friend, thanks for joining me for another episode of Job with Juli. I am Julie Slattery, and I'm so glad that you are here. This podcast is an outreach of a ministry called Authentic Intimacy, which is dedicated to helping people make sense of God and sexuality. Well, unfortunately, our news feeds are full of accounts of childhood sexual abuse. But sometimes we need to be reminded that behind every news story is a family. And as we grieve with those families, we also want to equip them. We receive a lot of emails at Authentic Intimacy from parents who've discovered that their children have been sexually violated. And so we're going to answer some questions from those emails in today's conversation. Abuse just can't be erased from a child's memory, but it can be handled in a way that minimizes future trauma and anxiety. And that's what we want to equip you with today. My guest is Dr. Debi Grebenik, and she has devoted her professional life to helping traumatized children and their parents. She's spent decades working within the foster care system, meeting with parents in her private practice, and teaching trauma-informed care to professionals. Debi and I are going to talk about what actually constitutes childhood sexual abuse. We'll talk about the signs or red flags that you might see in a child, when and how you should report an abuse, and how you can be diligent, not fearful, as you raise young children in a culture where, unfortunately, the opportunity for unwanted exposure to sex can be found online or just in some places that even feel safe. Well, we're going to be talking primarily about sexual abuse. The principles that Debi is going to share can be adopted to other forms of childhood trauma as well. So let's head to the coffee shop for my conversation with Dr. Debi Grebenik. So Debi, I am so grateful for your expertise, particularly on trauma and childhood trauma, because we're learning more and more about how early childhood trauma experiences impacts us for the rest of our lives. And you've dedicated your professional life to studying this, so thank you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Let me just start out. We're going to dive into childhood trauma, particularly childhood sexual abuse today. And I want to just start by asking you, how common is it for a child to be sexually abused in today's day and age? And I ask this partly because I've seen some research saying that actually it's going down. Incidence of child sexual abuse is going down. But I feel like in my own experience, I'm hearing more and more incidents of this happening.
Well, I think that's interesting, and I don't know that I'm the person that can give you the current data. I don't stay up on that. What I do know is that while if it is going down, what we're also seeing is that in the church it's safer to speak up. And I think people are speaking up, and I think that we've broadened our definition of what sexual abuse is. It's not just this or this or this. We've made it to that, the threat of it, the exposure. We've allowed people, when they have felt that threat, so they can define when they felt unsafe with an individual, with somebody that is in a position of trust with them. And so I think it's really important that we allow them to disclose and come forward at whatever. And even if we say, well, that doesn't meet the definition of sexual abuse by law or by statute, that we allow them to be able to tell their stories. And I think that that's one of the things I'm so glad about, is that there's people that are open and that we're allowing more and more of those stories to start come up. So whether it's going down or not, I don't know. I do think that we're doing a better job of responding and not hiding it as much as we've done in the past.
Yeah. So you brought up this whole idea of we don't even know what child sexual abuse means. What does it constitute? And when people ask you that, they'll probably ask it in the form of a question like, this or this happened. It's not, I don't know if it's abuse, but so how would you respond? What does sexual abuse constitute?
That's a great question. And there are some legal definitions for it to be criminally prosecuted or to have some ramifications, legal ramifications. I go back to if I felt that someone crossed a barrier. So I look at, for a child, if they felt unsafe, and that would be the word I use, if they felt unsafe, that someone was violating a boundary they had, whether it be touch or it be an emotional threat, it be something that caused them to go on the alert. So an adult, somebody in a position of power, somebody bigger, in some way, shape, or form, tries to take advantage of somebody that's innocent. Now, it could, always say children, but it could be a at-risk adult. It could be someone that is developmentally delayed. And I think that we have to broaden our scope, that it's anybody that's would be considered part of a vulnerable population. So if that boundary is violated of them, which could be the way somebody speaks to them. They could speak to them sexually. They could make intonations about their bodies, make comments. And that probably doesn't meet the threshold of sexual abuse. However, it's leading up to, it's kind of in that grooming area of that. And then it would also include like touch, or when we think of sexual abuse, we always think of, intercourse or coercion or fondling. And sometimes sexual abuse can be about the threat. I'm going to do this to you if you don't do this for me. And so that's where the real harm and the real detriment comes.
There's these competing things happening in our society right now. On the one hand, as you mentioned, there's so much more awareness of sexual abuse and boundaries and giving people voice to speak what happened to them. But on the other hand, there's this normalization of anything goes sexually, particularly with pornography, where young children are being exposed to violent sex through pornography, through deviant sex, we might say. Just whatever they want to see, they can see. And some people are saying that even that exposure to pornography is a form of sexual abuse. What do you think about that?
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree, because one of the things that I have said for a long time is that our children get exposed to the pleasure pathways of the body when they're not emotionally ready to handle that. And so when you think about that, that's what pornography does, because it's going to stimulate and activate a part of the brain that God created for sexual pleasure. And it's a beautiful thing. And the children should not be having that stimulation or that exposure at such an early age, because they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to handle that emotionally. They're not equipped for what their body's feeling. So when we expose them early on, we're actually setting a little track in their brain where then when they're stressed, that's where they go to. And so then they might begin an addiction and craving of the, more and more of the pornography. So I think it's really important that we understand that just because they're a child doesn't mean that the impact is not significant. We've thrown away our kids thinking that, they're just a little child, what's the big deal? When in reality, it is a big deal.
I would also guess that just early exposure to pornography, when I say early, we're seeing ages like 7, 8, 9, that these are the average ages of exposure, because those experiences for some kiddos are so powerful that we see acting out sexually, which can lead to child-on-child abuse. Whereas when we were growing up, it was like, hey, are we going to play doctor? And there's a curiosity about what does a boy's body look like, maybe some innocent curiosity like that. Today, the average 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, that curiosity can play out into children experimenting sexually together. Is that something you're seeing more of?
Well, my background has been working with foster children for years, and unfortunately, many of the children are removed from the home because of maybe some level of abuse and or neglect, domestic violence, substance abuse addictions. And what I would say is oftentimes there was failure to protect. And so a child might have been exposed either to domestic violence or to pornography or to sexual abuse, to neglect. And so that changes their brains. And so when they get stressed, they go to a place that's pleasurable, and sometimes that's sexual. And so I'd like us not to vilify kids, and you weren't by any means, but I'd like us not to vilify our kids for acting out sexually.
Right.
Now, I want to make sure that we really hear this the right way from me. We have to, safety and protection of our children, all children, is paramount to everything I do. I don't want any child acted on sexually by another child, an adult, anybody. And I think we have to look at that when a child acts out sexually, they're actually telling us they're dysregulated. Yeah. They are hypervigilant. Something's not okay with them. And so they're going to a place of trying to calm that stress hormone, cortisol. It's raging in their bodies. And we know that oxytocin, that bonding hormone, we know that that's emitted through sexual touch, and that calms cortisol. Yeah. So sometimes they're revved up, they're all, raging cortisol, and so they look for a way to discharge that. And so that's where sometimes some of the sexual acting out behavior begins to happen, and then it becomes a reinforcing pattern. Stress, I need a release, I act out sexually, and we also see chronic masturbation. That's another way that our kids release as well. And so rather than our going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And they do things and it scares us. Yeah. We need to look at the function of that behavior, and what is their need, not try to just get them to be compliant. You got to quit doing that. Stop. Don't. Never. And because when we do that, we layer their behaviors with shame. And then they're going to go underground. And this is where they start to become more covert. And they're still going to try to get that need met, calm their cortisol, but it's going to be probably in less acceptable ways.
Boy, that's
I said a whole lot there.
You did.
So I hope that makes sense.
You did. And you mentioned that you do most of your work with kids that are really at risk and that have been removed from homes or in foster care. But these patterns also happen within what we might say normal, stable families, because we live in a fallen world and everything is so sexualized. A lot of times we'll get questions at Authentic Intimacy asking what is normal, how much curiosity, sexual touch, how much masturbation is normal for a 5, a 6, a 7-year-old child, and when should a parent be concerned with what they might be seeing their child engaging in? What are some good guidelines in terms of looking for red flags?
That's a great question. And even though my experience has been in the foster care area, I have watched this with other families and navigated this as being a pastor's wife for 40 years, seeing us in the church figure out what that looks like, and even in the Sunday school classes and whatever. I think that we need to always be wary but not fearful. Okay. And I don't want to, perfect love casts out all fear. God the Father is that perfect love. And so I don't live a fearful life. What I do think is that we need to be prudent. We need to keep our eyes open. We need to not read into things. However, I think it's really important that we pay attention when our child starts having some increased behaviors and try to figure out what that looks like. Maybe they have meltdowns. Maybe they're more obstinate than usual. Maybe they are not wanting to be around a certain person. Maybe we see them just have episodic incidents of aggression. Yeah. That can be another way. They're telling us the stress in their body is so big, they need to figure out a way to discharge. I also think that if we ever see any elements of coercion, that's the place we want to really lean in. So we see them, maybe an 8-year-old playing with a 4-year-old, and the 8-year-old dominating and telling the 4-year-old, you got to do this, you got to do that. And we overhear it. I think we need to look at how to help our children play age developmentally appropriate. So an 8-year-old with a 4-year-old telling them, take your clothes off, I'm going to do this, that's not appropriate. Yeah. So yes, they want to explore and see, and I have 7 grandchildren, and we understand that they have normal curiosity. And so what does that look like? We answer their questions with authentic, straightforward answers. We use anatomical names for their body parts, and then we talk about that it's never okay for somebody to touch you without your permission. So we educate from a very early age, and we taught our boys not to approach other girls and lift their dresses and pop their bra straps. And we taught them to respect girls' boundaries. And so I think that we can lay that foundation. And when they tiptoe beyond some of those things, we're not going to freak out. We're going to attend to it. We're going to stay in that zone and consult professionals. If you have any questions, good grief, just ask somebody, hey, my kid's doing this. What do you think? And sometimes a clinician, a pastor, a friend, they can normalize, or they can say, well, you might want to, take care of this now before it escalates.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I like about how you describe that is you're encouraging parents to look at more than just sexual behaviors.
Right.
A lot of times we think of sexuality as being this separate part of who a person is, but you're saying this is a pattern that involves all of who a child is.
Yes.
Their stress, their environment, their relational patterns, how they handle anger, that you're looking for red flags and how your child is doing in every area, not just this one behavior. And looking at the problem as not just a sexual problem, but as an issue of how a child's handling change or stress or relationships.
Wow, you really got that. That's impressive. So, and I'm glad that came through, because I think that you're right. We can't look at our child just as this person with sexual issues any more than we would look at them as just somebody that has body issues or somebody that has emotional issues. Has to be holistic. I'd like to add to that discussion. One of the things that's paramount to our being able to parent them is trust.
Yeah.
So we do everything we can to keep them safe, and they learn to trust us. We learn to trust them, and we have to trust them at their developmental level. I'm not going to give a 4-year-old my cell phone and not expect that he's not going to get on Amazon and order a pair of shoes for $150, which my grandson did. So but that was on us for not trusting the process. You've got to trust at developmental phases, and so that is part of their growth. And we don't want to expose them and give them more than what they can handle.
Yeah.
And that keeps that safety and containment, which that's our job as parents, and keep things in that need to be in and things out that need to be out.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and sometimes it feels incredibly overwhelming.
I want to take some time and kind of use this as a mailback kind of show, because I have this incredible expert in front of me, and we get some difficult questions related to this at the ministry. So I'm just going to read a few. We're going to go through a few emails that hit on these issues, and I'd love for you to respond. So here's one. A woman writes in, I don't know what defines sexual abuse, but as a parent, what happened to our 15-year-old daughter certainly seems to qualify. I recently learned that a few years ago she was touched inappropriately by an uncle who's only a few years older than her. It has caused broken trust, shame, embarrassment, hurt, and confusion. While it sounds like an isolated incident, it doesn't lessen the pain and has greatly complicated our family connections. We're all Christ followers and are supposed to be able to find security, safety, and trust within our physical and spiritual family. So where do we go from here? What do we do? Do we confront my underage brother-in-law and my father and mother-in-law, who are his parents? We have 3 other girls that we know we need to talk about this as well. So there's so much in that question, but that's a real life situation that many people are walking through. Relationship dynamics, family dynamics. Where would you begin?
And these are not happening for the fringes of this is happening mainstream.
Right.
This is happening all the time. And I think it's really important that she identified, the writer, it sounded like it was the mom, the writer identified, while it seems as though it's an isolated experience, it's not about what happened, it's about the violation.
Yeah.
And so it's not about, well, I hear this all the time, well, he just touched her. He didn't, penetrate. I'm like, well, wait a second.
Yeah.
You've got a person in a position of trust, a person that young person trusted violated that boundary and made them feel unsafe. So now that creates distrust, and then it's kind of like the ripple effect. Now I distrust this one person, so I distrust anybody looking like that person, and then I distrust anybody of that same gender, and then I distrust everybody. So it starts to get this ripple effect. One of the things that we can do is the first thing that went through my mind was the parents of this young person or this person that violated her did they address it with them? Because what we do is we want to bring it to light. Because when we don't, we actually create additional layers of shame. Like she made it up, or it's her problem, or she asked for it, or it didn't really happen, or it wasn't that bad. And so I'm not saying we make a big deal about it. I'm really just saying, did we have clarification about it? It wasn't okay. You did it. We're not okay with it. And for right now, we're going to erect a boundary, and you are not welcome in our home. And until we feel that we can be safe here at having you, we're not going to let you in our home again. So it's a real statement that says that we believe you, we're going to keep you safe, and it validates for them. And it creates, it's like reparative. It offers an opportunity to repair that broken trust that she had with another individual. So we have to work twice as hard to rebuild trust. And that's what the parents need to do to help them feel safe again. So we have to go a little extreme, like you're not welcome in our house. We're not gonna go to their house. You make some real definitive statements until she's had some time to heal. And I think we're so afraid to do that. We're afraid to hurt people, family members. We're afraid to, and we're hurting this young girl. And it changes her brain. It changes her brain because it violated her trust. And so she looks at the world differently now. And she'll move through it, and she'll heal. And God's design is for her to be back, and she'll be able to weave that into the story that God has for her if we make sure that she knows that we think it was wrong and we're going to keep her safe.
I could put myself in this family situation and think of all the fear that I'd have to do that. One element we haven't even mentioned is the need to report this. This is a minor who's been sexually abused, and by law, if somebody like you or me in the clinical profession or a teacher or a pastor were to hear what's happening, by law we would need to report this to Child Services. So now you have the added complication of parents that are mad at you and maybe don't believe you. They're protecting their son. And now family reunions are going to be messy for the next 20 years. And I could see how the temptation is, hey, maybe it only happened once. All we need to do is talk to her. She'll be okay. Let's put it in the past. Why is it so necessary to go through the steps of reporting, dealing with it, creating the conflict among family?
Gosh, this is simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's a simple process. First of all, it's against the law to have that kind of contact without permission.
Yeah.
And I don't want to come across as though I'm this, like, oh, he looked at her, let's sue. That's not it at all.
No.
This young man might need treatment. He might need something before it escalates and does something that will affect the course and the trajectory of his life for the rest of his life. And so I also think about him. And I'm not a fan. I don't think everybody has to be in therapy. No. Yet, I do think that there are some crisis points, and sometimes those crisis points are opportunities for somebody to intervene and grow and change so that things don't get worse. I do believe strongly in reporting. I think that it starts the process of saying to her, you are going to be safe, and we will do everything within our power to make you safe. Those are the things that mitigate what happens. It's when we push it under the rug and we go, oh, it was only one time, and it was, it's your cousin, and we're going to have to see him a lot, and, let's just try to keep this on the down low. And I think, or one of the other things that I've seen in the past, not as much now, churches would try to do their own investigation and keep things within the family.
Yeah.
And I think that that can be very dangerous as well, because we're not trained to do that. I'm not an investigator. I don't do it. I just say report. Let them, they're impartial, and they can make recommendations. And those recommendations are not about gotcha. They're about, what does everybody involved need? And what can we do to make sure that they get those needs met? So I think it's vital that we do that. I also think it's a great way to validate for the person who's been violated, to know that we're taking their experience very seriously.
Yeah. And I think part of what we're seeing come out in our culture today in terms of the tremendous brokenness, particularly of women, but also men who've been sexually abused, the pattern was never to report.
Right.
And it was, if you told your parent, if you told your pastor, it was like, oh, let's just move on. It's not that big of a deal. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. And like you're mentioning, that sets both the offender and the victim up for a lifetime of hiding, of secrets, of shame, of acting out. And so although it creates a crisis in the short term, you're saying in the long term, it's going to be better for everybody.
Totally agree. And I like how you framed that. I think that we also have to look at, we're not here to shame the offender either. We're here to figure out and understand what the purpose and what need that this male or female has, so that we can meet that need as well. They are also created in God's image. They are not to be shunned and spit out. They're to be treated and understood. And so I think that by reporting, sometimes it bubbles it up to the surface so that we can see what we're dealing with, and then we can make what I like to say informed decisions. We make informed decisions. We know. And sometimes we uncover that there's a history of this involvement by the offender. And so it might be that we helped get it opened up so that we can help the healing to begin.
Debbie, one thing that really complicates this is the fact that when you report sexual abuse, very likely the offender will become a registered sex offender. And you might be talking about a 13, 14, 15, 17-year-old kid who is acting out, made one very foolish mistake, and then once you become a registered sex offender, that follows you for the rest of your life, which that's heavy.
It's very heavy. There are some ways to get expungement. I've seen that personally with some people that went through. The thing is that we are very, very concerned about community safety. And that's why there's a sex offender registry, so that we know if they live in our neighborhoods, so that we can keep our children safe. And the other piece about that is that the sex offender registry process requires treatment. And it's very predictable, very model fidelity, and it's very structured. So they have to complete that treatment. And it's incredibly strict during the process. And what they say is that you can't heal, fix a offender, but we can keep them from reoffending. And I would look at that God can heal a heart, can heal a soul, and He can give them redemption. And if they follow all the things they need to do. So I think it's a both and. And I'm not a big fan of for the rest of your life or something that I did when I was 14. Goodness, there was things I did when I was 14 that, are not things that I'm proud of. So what does that look like? And how can we give mercy and grace, healing, and compassionate accountability? So there has to be accountability, because community safety, children's safety is paramount in everything we do.
Yeah. An example of this is teens sext each other. They send each other nude photos. And my understanding is if you forward one of those pictures on, you are criminally liable for distributing underage pornography. And so you've got kids doing these kinds of things without realizing what they're doing, and the legal things that these can entail for them. And those are the kind of conversations we need to be having with our teenagers before they happen.
That's a great point. and let me just go a little clinical on this for a second. The teenager's brain's not fully developed, and so they're not thinking consequentially.
Especially with a cell phone in their hand.
That's exactly right. They're impulsive. They're in the moment. They're not going, oh, this might get me on a sex charges for the rest of my life. That might affect my ability to be a teacher or, work in human services or be a police officer. No, they're not thinking. And so they do something, and I would look at, is there a different way for us to treat that? Is it okay? No. And is there a different way for us to respond? What does that look like? And I think that it's really hard because they have access to all this social media, all these pieces. So maybe that's where the parents can step in, and they don't have as much access as we're allowing at this point.
Yeah.
It's not a popular response.
It's
though.
not, and unfortunately, teens find a way around.
They do.
Would you say, in your experience, that the government agencies that regulate all this, are they taking this kind of thing into account and trying on their end to put laws in place that protect but don't vilify what a lot of teenagers end up doing?
I think there's probably little pockets where there's some understanding and there's some, we're looking at the brain and putting in place. I don't know that it's very widespread because the community uproar is pretty significant about we've had and it's the parents of the daughter whose picture was forwarded.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're doing victim impact statements, and those are what generally woo legislators, our criminal defense attorneys. That's usually what we're making decisions on, and we're not always putting them in context. Again, please hear me, not to excuse, but to explain. This is just about explaining and being able to hold kids compassionately accountable, but not affecting the rest of their life because they passed on they need to understand within a boundary how this affects other people and themselves.
Yes.
It's a hard thing.
Let me read you another email. And again, these are heartbreaking emails of real families. My beautiful 3-year-old daughter reported to me and my husband that a daycare worker had touched her private area inappropriately. We followed through with all the proper authorities, and she's in play therapy, but we feel helpless. We don't know how to respond when we know she has been masturbating or when she tells us her privates hurt because the gal touched her. Again, probably a situation that you're familiar with. And these parents did the right thing by reporting, by getting their child into the appropriate therapy, but they still say they feel helpless. What advice would you have for a family in that situation? And let's even back up. A child comes home from daycare or school or camp and says something happened. How do you respond? What questions do you ask?
Well, I'm going to probably take a pretty non-traditional approach. I'm going to say that our first job is to express empathy because that allows them to be where they are in their experience. As parents, we want to rush in and fix it. And we want to give them answers. And, you're not going to go back there and
or
you'll
even
be
more,
okay.
or
It
even
only
more
happened
so,
once.
I would want to investigate.
Yes.
I'd be like, what happened?
Yeah.
Where'd you get touched? How many times?
Yeah.
And so you're saying neither of those are the right first response.
Right. Our job is to be the parent, and the parent means I'm going to be empathetic and protective. And so whatever that looks like, if I think there's something going on, I'm not sending that child back to daycare the next day. I'm going to call it in. I'm going to trust the process, which is the hardest thing imaginable because we have no control. And yet they're trained to do this, and they know what they're doing. So I'm also going to validate them. And when I say expressing empathy, what I'm talking about is saying things like, oh, baby, I'm so sorry. Nobody should be touching you there. That makes me so sad. I am so sorry. And we just stay there. We don't comment on what actually happened because that can taint their story. And we don't want to taint the story because that's what needs to happen in the investigation. So that's why we don't want to ask the questions because we want it to be as pure. And by our asking questions, then it can change their recall of it, which can change the whole thing. And we want people held accountable for doing these things. So in the event of daycare, we want them to be held liable for this so that we protect children. I think the other piece here is that we tell them, you're my baby, I'm going to keep you safe, and no matter what, I'm going to keep you safe. I'm here for you, and I'm not going anywhere. Because what starts to happen is shame just is like waiting to lurch in and take over. And remember, guilt is what we do, and shame is who we are. And so shame comes in of, I caused it, it's all my fault. And we start believing that we didn't do enough to stop it. Even these little 4-year-olds, I should have told him to go away, this kind of thing. And then pretty soon they begin to internalize, I'm not enough. And this is where we see the trajectory of adult women who never processed what happened to them in a safe environment. And so they still are trying to figure out that they don't feel good enough, they don't feel slim, and whatever it is, they don't feel enough, that they are not enough. And so we want to allow our kids whatever they need to say, however they need to say it. If they need it, and oftentimes we'll see they start defecating, they start urinating in different places, they start either hoarding food, they do all different kinds of things because they lost control over their body. So now they're trying to reassert their control over their body. So they masturbate excessively. That will die down. What we want to do is when they start to do that, look at what's their need. Meet the need, and the behaviors diminish. If we focus on the behaviors, they often increase. And that's our tendency. We want to come in and fix. Well, I'm going to get them to not masturbate anymore because we're going to do this and this and this. Well, are we noticing a pattern that happens after they're around so-and-so? Okay, well then let's try to figure out what's going on with them, meet that need, calm them, and they'll be less likely to revert to the sexual acting out behaviors, aggression, defecating, urinating, those kinds of things. Our job is to meet their needs.
So a parent might say, well, that's easy for you to say. You're a doctor of psychology and you have all this training, but I'm an average parent. How in the world do I know what my child's need is? All I see is that he or she is acting out, and it's creating havoc in our family.
Well, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot. And here's what I would say is, I might be an expert on some of this trauma stuff, but they're an expert on their child. They are the expert. And, it comes very early on. We're like, oh, that's the hungry cry. Oh, that's the sleepy cry. I'd say use those same attunement skills to your child now. Oh, well, they're acting out. I noticed that happened right after they went to the playground. I wonder what was going on at the playground. So we start to look for the patterns and the themes, and that's what will lead us to the answers. These are very seldom isolated events. There's usually a pattern or a theme to their behaviors. We see the acting out after certain things, when they get really tired, when they get really hungry. Think about our resistance to things becomes lowered when we're hungry or we're tired. Same thing with the child. So watch those patterns. And even if they can't figure it out, have them start journaling it. And when they start to journal, the dots, they start connecting the dots.
There might be parents that are listening to this, and this has made them feel very fearful. Maybe they already felt that way. I think particularly if you yourself have been sexually abused as a child, you're going into parenting with this fear of, I don't want this to ever happen to my child. How do you approach this whole topic as a parent, being vigilant and careful without being paranoid?
Yeah, it's just so hard. I don't know that I have an easy answer. I'm just compassionate with people that we don't want to live from a place of fear. I think that that's not God's design for us. And I always say, we want to pay attention. So just pay attention. And if you listen to, I think it's the Holy Spirit's promptings in I call it informed intuition. I'm going to pay attention, and then I'm going to ask God to speak through His Holy Spirit in my spirit. And when I feel like something's not right, I'm really going to listen to that. But I'm not going to be looking for things. But we do need to look for, when we see any elements of coercion in somebody's language, in their body posture, or if we see our child acting different around a certain person, we just lean in and pay attention to those things. We don't look for it, but we don't, not pay attention. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Okay.
And practically, like I've spoken with couples that have a very different view on this. So say, for example, the mom, maybe she has trauma in her past, says every time our kids are over your parents' house, your dad creeps me out. And I don't feel safe. And I'm wondering if our kids are safe. And the father is saying, there's nothing wrong. Like, my family's perfectly healthy. There was never any abuse. He's just hugging our daughter. These kind of conversations are normal, I think, in today's day and age. Of one person has some concerns, whether it's a relative or it's a neighbor or a teacher, and the other parent is like, no, I think you're making too much out of this. How do you resolve that?
Wow. And you know what? I hear this all the time, that our tolerance levels. And because it's familiar, sometimes we don't see it.
Yeah.
So maybe, like you just said, the husband and it's his family, it's familiar to him, so he may not see it. I would ask that the wife in this situation say, you know what, I trust you implicitly. However, what if we were able to put some things in place that would help me feel better too? Could we meet kind of in the middle? So I trust you that your dad really is a safe person. However, I'm not comfortable with our prepubescent daughter spending the night at his house. So what if we let them stay over there, but they can't spend the night? Or something to that effect. So you kind of meet in the middle. And I also think we have to be wary of our own trauma histories activating and causing us to be hypervigilant. So it's a fine balance there. And understanding what's my history and what's reality there. And so maybe this is the other flip side of that, is the wife saying to the husband, I'm going to trust you because I know that I'm being activated from my own history, and it was from an older man. And so I don't want to read in and see anything. So let's just pray for discernment together. And then she really asked him to help protect her from this and from seeing things. And I think that's where the real healing happens, is that we can trust each other. So we come together as parents because we both have the same goals to protect our children, but we unite and talk about intimacy and trust to really put it out there and go, oh my gosh, this makes me so anxious, and I really want to trust and lean into you to help protect me from letting my imagination go too far.
Boys, you really need each other. You need each other's strengths.
And I think that's how God yokes us together, because of that balancing piece. So because of my training, I would tend to see more things, and my husband's more like, but. And so it was a real good balancing act for us. And I learned to just trust him enough that I could relax about those things.
So one more question, as a mom and as a grandma. When you and I were growing up, it was so normal to have sleepovers.
Yes.
Or to have overnight camp, church camp. Those are part of my growing up, and nobody thought anything of it. In today's environment, there are a lot of parents who are just saying, I don't know if sleepovers are ever a good idea. I don't know if overnight camp is ever a good thing, because our awareness of what can happen. What's your response to that?
I think it's their decision to make, and I'll respect that. I think that we can't keep our children, isolated. They're going to find ways to connect with kids. I think the better thing for me would be, rather than keeping them away from that, I would build up their inner sense of who they are, so that they are able to have a voice for themselves and say, no, stop. You can't do that. I don't want you to touch me. I don't, get away. Leave me alone. And that we give them that voice, and we allow them to practice that. And it's hard because they practice it on us. And so they learn this little voice starts to develop as a very young child. And so our not squelching that, but channeling it. And I had very definite children. They all had a voice. And sometimes I wanted to take the voice away that I had given them because they used it against me. So, and yet I'm really proud of the fact that they were assertive enough to know and come to us when things weren't being done in a way that they felt safe. And they wouldn't have said those words. They would have just said, "Oh, Mom, I don't want to go over there anymore." How come? Well, because. And they had a sense about that because things were predictable with us and even the uncertainties. So going back to the question, I don't know that I can make that call. I think that a couple has to do it. And if they're that uncomfortable, that fear will get translated to the kids. And the kids won't be able to relax and have a good time where they're there, because often what happens is then the parents are calling all the time, or they're stopping by, or they've put a message into the kids about, well, if this happens, or if this happens, or if that happens. And in reality, that it might be better that they just don't even go if they're going to be, kind of hypervigilant with the fear. Does that make sense?
It does.
There?
Yeah. Parenting is just complicated.
It's so
but
hard.
It's building. It's building a person is what you're saying, and part of that is putting boundaries in.
Yes.
But a more important part is building that resilience and discernment. And you have to know your child. You might have one kid where you're like, hey, I know this child is going to speak up, and you have another that maybe doesn't have that strong sense of self.
And that's a very, very important part. And I think the key would be that you have the relationship with the parents of your children's friends. And when you have that, when you have trust with them, then your children can go and spend the night with them. I mean, we had agreements with some of the friends' parents, and we knew what to let them get away with and what not. And we had conversations that the kids never knew we had. And so that's another way to create safety and containment. And the kids don't really have to know all that. Who knows?
Well, I'm so thankful to Dr. Debi Grebenik for her expertise in helping me answer these very difficult questions. Another resource I want to mention is child advocacy centers. Now, most cities will have a child advocacy center, and they exist as a resource for families to educate parents on how to prevent child abuse, but also to make sure that parents have resources and information they need if they've discovered that a child has been abused. We'll link to a national advocacy center on our podcast page, and then you can find a local center from there. They can be a great resource for you. Now, if you're an adult who is still struggling to heal from childhood sexual abuse, we'll also link to some blogs and other Job with Julie episodes that will encourage you and help you to take steps towards your own healing. You can find all of that at our website, AuthenticIntimacy.com. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to having coffee with you next time on Java with Julie.